Here he is, the host of OverDrive on TSN 1050, Bryan Hayes, playing the role of Florida man this week. And I got to say, veteran move, Hazy, taking the week off from radio, but still cashing these TV checks. You truly learned from the best, Noodles and O-Dog. So nice job there. But let's talk about these Leafs. The lines were put in a blender at practice on Wednesday. Mitch Marner still nursing that lower body injury. We know he won't play on Thursday. Calle Jarnkrok on the top line. And Auston Matthews, still the best goal scorer on the planet, but cooled off a little bit of late. 2 goals in 8 games. Is it time to admit, Bryan, that he just might not hit 70 goals this season?
I'm not quite there yet, Glenn, because this guy is a freak of nature. As you just said, he's still the best goal scorer in the world. 16 goals in 18 games. If there's one guy in the National Hockey League that can do that, it's Auston Matthews. He's been on heaters like that multiple times this season, but he's really cooled down. You mentioned it, 2 goals in his last 8 games, only 1 in his last 5, and now Marner's injured, and he's not going to play Thursday, and the Leafs are being pretty coy about his injury and how long he's going to be out. So that will have a factor on whether or not he can get there. And let's say we push 70 to the side here for Matthews. I think he still has 3 goals in mind in terms of scoring numbers. He wants to get to 61, which I believe he still will. That will set a new personal record. That will move past his 60 he had a couple of years ago. Then I think he wants to get to 65, so he passes McDavid from a year ago when Connor McDavid had 64. And then it's 66, so you pass Alex Ovechkin. And Ovi, in my opinion, the greatest goal scorer in the world, and he's established that for quite some time, or was, certainly. Now it's Matthews, but maybe greatest goal scorer ever. His greatest season back in 08-09, he had 65 goals. I think if Matthews can get to 66, and I understand we're moving the goalposts here a little bit, but you get to 66, that's still a massive number. And I do wonder if it would make his life easier if he got away from so much focus on the amount of goals he's going to score. As you know, Glenn, this is a player in Auston Matthews and a core in Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares, Riley. They've been so hyper-focused on personal achievements, and the fans of the Maple Leafs have been so focused on that, but sometimes at the detriment of what they've been doing down the stretch into the playoffs, preparing for the playoffs, and ultimately succeeding in the playoffs. And I think Matthews and his whole team, they're trying to convince the world the only thing that matters is playoff success. So if you're hyper-focused on an individual accolade, albeit it would be incredible, I think it'd be an amazing story. Obviously, he'd love to get to 70, 66, 65, 61, like I mentioned. But if you could put those bold numbers aside and he can really focus on the playoffs, I think that might be beneficial for him in the end. So I wonder if Matthews, in a weird way, would be okay with the fact that we actually get off these conversations revolving around 70 goals.
Yeah, and for the next few weeks, kind of just focus on the team game and get them, in proper shape before the postseason. So the Leafs, they played just the 1 game, Hazy, since the trade deadline. That was the win over the Habs on Saturday night. They didn't make any forward additions this year. Did sign Bobby McMann to the contract extension on Wednesday. But what's your confidence level at in terms of when the playoffs arrive that this group up front can carry them offensively deep into the playoffs?
Well, based on their history in the playoffs, it's not really through the roof confidence, but it better get to that point, Glenn. It better get to a point where we get to game 1 of the playoffs and the Maple Leafs believe that their main pieces can drag them to the promised land, because that has been their team's philosophy for years now. They have been built around Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares. This will be year 6 with the 4 of them up front for this team. They go to the playoffs every single year. They obviously haven't had enough big moments. They had 1 big moment off the stick of John Tavares last year in the first round, Game 6 OT winner, to finally get them past Tampa. We saw what happened the next round against Florida, and that is their philosophy. Every team in the league has a different one. The Leafs' philosophy for years has been put a ton of money and a ton of ice time into their big boys. Yes, they're flawed deeper in the lineup. Yes, their defense is not perfect. Yes, there's question marks around their goaltending. I'm not downplaying the significance of other issues that revolve around this team, but it's a 32-team watered-down league. Every team in the league has question marks. Florida, Boston, New York, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Vancouver, they all have question marks. The question for the Leafs will be, can the big boys drag them there? And leading up to the trade deadline, I thought there was way too much focus on getting help for these guys as opposed to these guys dragging this team where it's supposed to go. It was almost as if excuses were being made. Well, they didn't get Hanifin, they didn't get Tanev, so how could you expect Matthews and Marner to perform in the playoffs? I look at it the complete opposite way. They still brought in a couple of pieces compared to what the rest of the division did, bringing in 2 defensemen, a depth forward. Florida didn't do much more. Boston didn't do much more. Detroit didn't. Tampa didn't do much more. The Leafs were kind of on par with what the other teams in their division did, but ultimately it's on their best players to get the job done. And I think Tree Living, Shanahan, I'll believe it when I see it, when one of these guys actually gets moved, if it fails in the spring. But this might finally be the time when the GM, the president are putting the focus on the main players, the best players up front, and saying, you do it. The pressure's on you guys. We've invested in you. You've had year after year after year where there's enough here to get you to the playoffs. It's on the best players to drag them to a cup final and possibly finally win a cup for the first time in a long time in Toronto.